Welcome to Cooking the Books. I'm Frances Cook. Regular listeners to this podcast will know I'm conflicted about cryptocurrencies. Right now, it doesn't fit my criteria for what makes a good investment. It's just too speculative. But that doesn't mean I think there's no future for digital currencies such as Bitcoin or blockchains such as Ethereum. In fact, far from it. I'm sure it will be there in the future. I'm just not sure what form. One issue is that governments, banks, and other major institutions are still very wary of it. So there's a possibility of these digital assets being whacked with the regulation stick in ways that we just don't see coming. Another big issue is right at the opposite end of the scale, with individuals. Stories abound of people losing hard drives or forgetting their password and not being able to access millions of dollars in cryptocurrencies that are rightfully theirs. That seems quite a major security problem. So, this time, let's talk to someone in the industry about what they think are the major hurdles and how they're preparing for them.
News Talk ZB presents Cooking the Books with Frances Cook.
I'm joined now by Lee Travers from Digital X. Now, cryptocurrencies, we've seen quite the boom in interest, particularly Bitcoin over the last year. But of course, they have been around ages longer than that. So walk me through how you work with crypto and what sparked your interest in it.
Excellent. Well, so great to be here on the show today. In terms of my journey in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, it's been for around 7 years now. Digital X's current offering, which I'm executive director of and sit mainly on the funds management side, is offering the ability for investors to buy into Bitcoin and digital assets in a safe and secure way. So through managed funds. We manage that on behalf of qualified investors so they can make investment decisions, and we take care of all the technical and administration challenges that you may have heard of around buying Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, wallets, potential hacks, accounting treatments, administration, all those sorts of things we take care of inside the managed funds. And that's one part of the business. The other part of the business is also working with the technology. So we build applications that are using blockchain technology, which we think is going to be quite transformative for business. And we've been building with that technology since around 2016. We built a number of different applications before. One was a remittance application out of the US that was licensed by Mexico's largest bank. But our current focus is on RegTech. So using these technologies to solve regulatory problems and compliance challenges that public companies have. So that's the current focus of the company. In terms of how I first got into sort of Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and blockchain, it was really more from that investment angle. I'd heard through my family actually that there was this really interesting currency that was used for online transactions, and sort of got me digging a little bit deeper and understanding it. And I was at a wealth management firm. We were transferring one of our clients a significant chunk of money. He lived in Brazil, and we obviously needed to send him his local currency. Now that transaction took 10 days and cost 10% in foreign exchange fees. And I learned all about intermediary banks and how that world works. And no one seemed to be too fussed that that sort of process had taken place. And it was just sort of seen as part of doing business with international transfers. So when I heard about Bitcoin, sort of combine those two together, then I've sort of been interested in it ever since.
That is fascinating. And there's so many little bits there that you mentioned that I think are fascinating areas for crypto. I mean, you talked about some of the hassles that can be there for the people who are trying to buy into these digital currencies. Walk me through some of the things that people can find difficult when they first say, oh, everyone's talking about crypto, I want to buy some. It's slightly more complicated than that, right?
Yeah, definitely. You don't go to your brokerage account and buy it on the share market. It is a case that these assets are traded on exchanges that are, in the most part, not regulated. And that has led to issues relating to business solvency as well as business practice. So locally in New Zealand, you may have heard of an exchange called Cryptopia, which is unfortunately subject to a really significant hack. These exchanges are holding Bitcoin cryptocurrencies in effectively a honeypot. They're securing it on behalf of all their users. So they're obviously a big target for those that are out there to try and steal other people's cryptocurrency. There are certainly ways of keeping it really, really secure, and that's what we're able to do with our funds. For example, the private keys that secure our Bitcoin are actually segmented into 3 different parts. So they require 3 different signatures, much in the same way as public companies would have a board of directors that need a number of signatories to make a bank transfer. We do the same thing with the Bitcoin. So what's one of the challenges is using these exchanges. Once you've found an exchange that you do think is doing the right thing, that you trust, then you'll need to transfer funds in to the exchange. Now, some of these have limits on the amount that you can transfer in. It might be $2,000 to $3,000 for first-time users, which obviously makes perfect sense for a lot of people that want to buy a small amount. But there are investors out there that now are buying millions of dollars. So I guess waiting for the approval of a few days to set up an account and then moving through those limits is not something that I guess wholesale or institutional investors want to go through the process for. So the banking issue is another one, and then how you secure your Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies is another. Do you leave it with the exchange? I mean, most exchanges will even tell you they're not the best place for storing. You should store it in a hardware device or using cold storage methods, which technically does require a little bit of understanding. But once you've done that, it is extremely secure. Finally, you've got your secure Bitcoin in your wallet. If you're investing on behalf of others as a fiduciary, potentially it's a self-managed super fund, and you need to get those holdings audited at tax time, it's actually really hard to do so for an auditor that hasn't been through that process before. I mean, how do you look on a blockchain and see that those assets are held there, but then you as the investor actually control that? So there are a few audit firms out there now that specialize in this and make that process really easy. But I've come across sort of acquaintances of mine, colleagues, etc., that have been through that process. It's been really painful and been really, really expensive to get their professional advisors around it. So yeah, using a fund is another reason why that would be useful. But I mean, the market was effectively designed for retail investors to come in. Small value transactions are really easy to do, but it's just important that you do make sure you know what you're doing and secure your assets appropriately as well.
Yeah, and I think that's quite a key issue from my point of view. I mean, if someone's coming into this and they're really interested, of course, there's different levels of technological knowledge and investing knowledge across various different people, even if they see an opportunity here. So how do you go about vetting these companies and deciding which one is the right one to invest through, and also getting yourself up to speed on the tech side of it? Like you say, something like the cold storage. I mean, how much do you need to know?
Well, on the exchange side, as I mentioned, most aren't regulated, which makes it tougher. In the US, there are some specific licenses that have been granted out of New York, which to go through that process as an exchange, you need to go through an extremely expensive, detailed process that requires adherence to those license requirements. So you'd be much more comfortable using those exchanges. Over in Australia, the industry body established a code of conduct for exchanges, and a number of exchanges in Australia have been through that certification process. So I would certainly trust those more than those that hadn't gone through that process. So that's sort of an element you can use. And the other one is sort of limiting your holdings on the exchange. So transfer your funds over there, buy what you need to buy, and then transfer it off onto cold storage or onto a hardware device. Now, there is a lot of educational content out there around that. YouTube videos are probably the best way to get started. I mean, it's certainly not a case that most mainstream universities will run courses on this yet, but I expect that's something to look forward to over the next few years as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because we've talked about crypto on this podcast before, and fully upfront. I mean, I'm still not sure about it as an investment yet, but even with my hesitancy there, I do truly believe it's going to stick around. There is a massive future for it, particularly the blockchain technologies that are part of it. Huge, already being used all over the place. And digital currencies in some form or another, I truly believe they're going to become more mainstream. They're going to find a use. I'm just not sure where it's going yet. But one of the big risks I think attached to it, to my mind, is of course how distrustful governments and banks are. And of course, these cryptocurrencies were designed to be, well, many of them were designed to be outside of government control. That's one of the appeals. But, we've seen a response from that in some areas. Here in New Zealand, we've seen banks just close accounts, sometimes very little reason given. And we've seen, some sort of words of caution from parts of the government. So what do you think could be a future for regulation? And are there barriers to it going mainstream from those quarters?
I think with respect to digital assets, Bitcoin, etc., there are many different use cases. They're all not trying to be a cryptocurrency. So just touching on Bitcoin, for example, that has no issuer. So it's not like you're issuing shares or issuing coins. There's no one group to target by regulators. There's now tens of thousands of nodes that are effectively like servers running the Bitcoin code, that it's now impossible for regulators to ban Bitcoin. They can ban their citizens from using it, but the genie is absolutely out of the bottle. Bitcoin is not going away. There is nothing that regulators can do now. It's had a 10-year head start, effectively to operate and I guess get that decentralization and distribution. So there's not a small group of people that own it. There's not a small group of issuers. It is out there in the world, and it is certainly running no matter what happens. I think that has given Bitcoin a bit of a head start in respect to sort of other digital assets that are trying to compete. When you start a digital asset, there's obviously going to be some pretty significant centralization, and that is something that regulators, if it's not done properly, will use their regulatory powers to stop. And they do that for good reasons. Obviously, you don't want securities law violations. You don't want issues that you have seen, in the digital asset industry around, potential, misleading, misrepresentation, giving preferential deals to early investors and then selling that to retail, etc. We really want to stamp that out. But with the way that Bitcoin is designed, that software can't be changed. And the issuance of 21 million Bitcoins into the market over time is based on a schedule that is all known to the marketplace. So that's really positive to issue coins into the market over time. It's really positive in that it can't be stopped by regulators. And I think there are the appropriate regulations applied to what we call like the fiat on-ramps and off-ramps. So that's every time you transfer cash into an exchange, that is a process where you will have to submit your identification and you'll be subject to anti-money laundering requirements, which is great. We absolutely want to stop that. Secondly, you'll also have over the Bitcoin blockchain analysis applied, because every single transaction in the history of time is linked and joined on the blockchain, and it can't be removed. So as a effective mechanism for criminals, etc., it's probably the worst technology to use as a payment infrastructure, because everything will get traced. When you come to bring out your funds into either a bank transfer or go through any of those fiat on-ramps or off-ramps, you will be linked. Every transaction you've ever done, you will be called for, and we've seen that time and time again. There's analytics now that show that transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain are probably only around 0.35%, so less than 1% linked to illicit activity, which is far less than cash. So it's come a long way since sort of those 2013, 2014 cries about what was happening on the dark web, what's going to happen with regulators banning it. You've actually had US regulators, including the FBI, auction off Bitcoins. they've sort of legitimized it from that process. If they're selling it, that means that they're probably not going to ban it at the same time. You've had groups like PayPal, MasterCard, Visa, all look at ways of integrating that into their offering. So the world's largest payment companies are legitimizing it. You've got investment banks like BlackRock, Guggenheim, Citigroup, all sort of writing their bull case for Bitcoin, price targets over $100,000, etc. So, these are institutions across all levels now that are really getting across, what Bitcoin is. And from a regulatory point of view, I don't think it's going to get banned. And I think it just needs to be managed appropriately so that we eliminate any issues around sort of criminal activity when we can.
Yeah, and of course the ultimate social media merger when Tesla bought into Bitcoin. That was, I think my Twitter just bombed for about a day of people just talking about this. I was like, guys, can we talk about anything other than Elon Musk and Bitcoin, please? No, apparently was the answer.
Well, I mean, it's so strategic for him.
Yeah.
I mean, how many Bitcoin people love Teslas? And then, he's
Great
effectively branding. They're going to accept it as a payment, as payment as well for cars. And then by putting on the balance sheet around 7.5%, that's certainly done some good support for the price as well. So you can buy more Tesla with your Bitcoin now too.
Yep. Oh, exactly. I think there's a big crossover in the fandoms there as well. I think what you mentioned there about it's unlikely to get banned, I suspect that you are right. There is, of course, such a wide range of other tools they can use before an outright ban. And I'm sure we see this time and time again in industries that are new-ish. I wouldn't say it's totally new, but new-ish, where there's a long time for regulators to catch up. And then when they're sort of thinking about what to do, there's often this, those who are in the industry, like yourself, will often think about, ways that you can work with government to show that, you are being responsible, and make sure that those regulations aren't too tough. So in your work, and obviously I'm sure you talk to other people in the industry, are there things that people are talking about, things that you need to make sure happen, things that you need to do to work with governments and try to make sure that whatever happens in the future, that we see these cryptos going more mainstream and more treated well by governments rather than getting that backlash response?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think it's a bit of a responsibility for everyone that's in the industry to support those elements around education and supporting the industry in their local country. To try and say you're going to do it across the entire world, I think is a bit of a tough challenge. So yeah, just to focus on your local country and do that, I think is important. To aid those efforts, we helped found Australia's blockchain industry body, which is Blockchain Australia. That was partly in response to Australia having originally the world's most expensive Bitcoins. So we had a GST on top of the sale value of Bitcoin rather than on the commission, like you'd have for a brokerage account, etc. So we established that. We're able to remove that. So Australia was sort of on a level playing field with other countries. And then it was really about educating the government as well. We managed to establish parliamentary friends of blockchain, not just about what Bitcoin is, Ethereum and cryptocurrencies, but also about what the technology can do. That's been really interesting. Recently, Australia's announced some funding for some pilot projects using blockchain that are looking to assist with the regtech industry. So it's an area we're playing in, I should say, and then also around what's happening with digital identity and provenance as well is a big area. So Australia, like New Zealand, has a significant amount of exports. They are high quality produce, and we are facing issues, particularly out of China, where that's copied. So using blockchain as a technology to effectively have that provenance around where products have come from. It is a challenge, obviously, using a digital tool like blockchain to authenticate real world products like meats or grains or milk, etc. But in terms of authenticating digital products, that's certainly an area of the market that's having a bit of a run at the moment. As what have we seen? What's probably the major one is tweets. So I'm not sure if you've seen that yet, but Jack Dorsey is actually auctioning off the ownership for his first ever tweet.
That's so weird. It's not even a good tweet.
It's not. I mean, it's certainly a historical one. It's a milestone. And collectible items are certainly something that generate value over time, and if not more value as time goes on. You could probably, with enough time. I don't know your personal art capabilities, but I'm sure enough time you could almost recreate the Mona Lisa.
Yeah. Well, definitely nobody wants my tweets. They're rubbish,
sure
a lot of them.
True.
Been giving them away for free for far too long, it would seem.
But yeah, I think digital items and collectibles are obviously something that do generate value, and blockchain is the perfect tool for that. How you get that sort of level where you can say you're officially supporting the artist. So I think there's some bands now that are having some limited releases where they'll sell, obviously, MP3 files or digital media files, which can be copied a million times over. But to have a set number that are provably linked to that original sale that's linked by a token is something that I think is just in its infancy, but an example of sort of how the technology has been used, not just like as a new payment or a new currency, but to generate an entirely new market. I saw some stats around the auction markets, and it's something like 20 or 25% of the sales is coming through from commissions. So if this is done right, you'd expect that marketplace to increase significantly, because you're only going to be paying a fraction of a percent going forward, let alone 20. So we often like to look at when new technologies come in, what marketplace is it replacing? But because they're so much more efficient by an order of magnitude, sometimes you can increase the marketplace so much more significantly as well. So if you probably look at the, back in the day, the transport market as it related to horse and cart, it's probably, X dollars, but as soon as you start throwing planes and cars and trains in, that market for transport increases exponentially. So may happen with digital art as well.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm very conscious of the time, but one of the big things that people have talked to me about is that it's not just necessarily the digital world, which is one challenge. It's that people are worried that they don't trust themselves. And one of the big headlines, of course, is Bitcoin has gone up by this much, or it's doing that. And it can shoot up in value very, very quickly, and people can become sort of the overnight millionaire is the big story. But then the next story after that is that people get locked out of their hard drives, or they forget the key, or they throw it away, or whatever. What is it like in terms of, is there any discussion in the industry around more security for these assets, or is it really, you've just got to be careful looking after your assets?
I think there's two elements to unpack there. The first one is overnight millionaires. There's really no such thing. I do know a few of those, and it's because they held them for 4 or 5 years. And that's really, really difficult to do when you see the price increasing. So I think anyone coming into the marketplace that's looking to make a lot of money really quickly, it shouldn't be assumed as this is an easy market. There are other people out there that are trading that are taking the other side of your trade. So you assume it's a case that if you think it's a good asset long term, then it's a buy and hold strategy. Typically works a lot better than trying to trade, particularly if you're not an experienced trader. So I would really advise against investing more than you could afford to lose, and also investing for the short term. That's really, really difficult to do. From a security point of view, I think some of the best devices out there are made by companies called Trezor and Ledger. ledger. They've been around for 4, 5, 6+ years in a majority of cases, and they've certainly been able to prove those tools as well. You'd only buy them directly from the manufacturing website, not from sort of secondhand sales. And the other one would be, if you are able to use a managed fund, that's a really secure way as well. Often because of their sort of standing and their procedures, you can get access to insurance over those Bitcoin holdings as well, which is really good. And that insurance is something that's improving over time. I remember when we first looked at it, it was around $500,000 per year to get $2 million of coverage with a $500,000 excess. So there was a certain window that would be better off, but you'd have to make sure you were hacked every few years to make that insurance worthwhile. It was completely rubbish. It was, yeah. Anyway, that's now improved into the hundreds of millions of dollars of coverage for basis points rather than significant one-off fees. So that is improving. The market is improving over time. But yeah, it's certainly a new technology, a new asset class. And if you are more conservative, you can use a fund, or wait till the ETFs or listed investment companies come into the marketplace. And it may be a higher price then, but certainly it'll be a lot easier to make an investment too.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old risk and reward relationship, right? That is true across all of investing, really. There is a possibility of really high reward if you take more risk. And by the time it gets slightly less risky, there's slightly less reward. And that's just, you've got to figure out where on that scale you sit. I must say that when you talk about the need to take a buy and hold strategy, that's a more standard, a more dependable strategy. You're absolutely speaking my language there. I think that is one of the things that potentially puts me off some of these things, is you get so many traders that are attracted to the bright, sparkly lights of crypto. And you can actually treat it as a much more a careful investment, even if it's still a risky investment, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Alongside that, there's also, the tendency just from human psychology that if your investment's down a little bit, just to sell it and say, oh, I don't want to feel that pain anymore. And then when it's rushing up to its all-time highs, you get the feeling that this investment's only going to go one way forever, and then you're buying at the top. So if you make a conscious decision to buy and hold, you won't have to worry about that, and hopefully avoid those sort of pitfalls. And most countries as well get benefits around holding periods on their tax as well. So certainly something to take advantage of if you're talking about potentially saving or making an extra 25% or so on your investment just by holding it a bit longer.
Oh, absolutely. It's really funny, actually. As we're recording this, it was just recently International Women's Day, and I was asked to be on a panel about women investing. And one of the big things is that women don't invest as much, but often when they do invest, they tend to be slightly better investors. One of the reasons is, contrary to popular belief, women are less emotional about their investments, and they don't freak out as much when a dip happens. And literally that night, after I was on that panel waxing lyrical about these things, my husband was talking to me and saying, oh, one of my investments went down. Damn it, I should have sold a while ago. And I was like, sweetheart, are you being emotional? Don't be emotional with your money. It didn't win me many points, but
Sounds like he needs to hand the responsibilities over to you.
This is what I say. All right, I could keep talking about this for ages because I'm loving this conversation, but we're going to have to wrap it up. I mean, if you had basically, what's your top opportunity that you would see for most people in crypto if they're interested, and what would you say is the biggest risk? So basically pro and con.
I would say probably the biggest risks are, the sensationalist headlines that you see, that people are becoming overnight millionaires, and the most obscure digital asset that has a tiny market cap is the best investment. It's been effectively seen that Bitcoin has been the best performing investment for something like 70% of the last 10 years. So when you're seeing the world's largest investment banks, when you're seeing groups like Tesla start to put it on their balance sheet, and invest into it, it's probably the best investment to have in the digital asset landscape from a risk reward ratio. You should definitely have Bitcoin as part of your portfolio if you're investing in digital assets. Ethereum's another one that has genuine use rather than just speculative demand. So I would have a look at that investment as well. All of these are very early stage in terms of their investment life cycle. So yeah, absolutely size your position accordingly. But yeah, it's something I think should have a really strong future, and I feel really passionately about.
Absolutely. I'll be so interested to see where it goes, and maybe we'll check in a couple of years and see where you're at and how it's all going. Thank you
Hopefully
very much.
sooner than that.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. That's Lee Travers from Digital X. Now, if you have questions about this podcast or any other money topic, do get in touch. Of course, we've done a few crypto episodes recently because you guys are fascinated by it. Me too, so any excuse. Send those questions through Facebook Francis Cook Journalist, Twitter Francis Cook, Instagram Francis Cook NZ. Pick your favorite and I'll try to get them answered on a future podcast for you. You can also subscribe to Cooking the Books pretty much everywhere you find podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Until next time, have a great day.